Back, everyone. At 40.7%, food inflation in Nigeria has reached its highest level in the past 25 years. But the federal government on Wednesday declared that with the strategic measures aimed at addressing the high food prices nationwide, prices of the items would crash in the next 180 days. That's specifically by January 2025. The Minister of Agriculture, Abubakar Kyari, said the measures, which include the suspension of duties, tariffs, and taxes for the importation of certain food commodities through land and sea borders, as well as the importation of 500,000 metric tons of wheat and maize, would tackle the rise in food prices. Tonight, let's get the perspectives of Johnson Chukwu, who is an economist and also the CEO, Kyari Asset Management Limited, on this latest development. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's good to see you again, sir.
Thank you for having me. Same here. Good evening.
Right. So about six strategies in total. So let's take it one out at a time. First is the 150-day duty-free import window for food commodities, and that covers suspension of duties, tariffs, and taxes for the importation of certain food commodities through land and sea borders. And we've heard the minister say these commodities include maize, husk, brown rice, wheat, and cowpeas. Imported food commodities will be subjected to a recommended retail price. So first, does this demonstrate a clear understanding of the complex matters on ground? And what are your expectations?
All right. Thank you once again for having me. What I will say is that, managing economy is a very delicate balancing act. Currently, we're dealing with an overwhelming cost of living crisis, which is why the federal government has acted by suspending duties and taxes on some imported food items. You did mention the food items. But this, like we all know, is a stopgap arrangement in the sense that the solution would be that we improve food production. Most of the food items that are leading to high food inflation in the country are not ordinarily imported food items. You're talking of tobacco, you're talking of cereals, are normally food that are produced locally. So we need to ultimately address the fundamental problem that is leading to this cost of living crisis, leading to the high cost of food. You did mention in your introduction that food inflation has gone to 40.7%, about 40.6%. So if we only depend on food imports, we're going to have, at best, a palliative. But also bear in mind that if you increase the size of the import, Naira will depreciate. If Naira depreciates, the pass-through effect of Naira depreciation will be that the food item that we're importing will land at higher cost. So you have to deal with two things. One, you must ensure that exchange remains stable so that the food that you're importing, change in exchange rate or loss of value of the Naira will not lead to a whittling of the benefits of the removal of the duties. So we need to address that. And like I said, because I said by saying economic management is a very delicate balancing act. Once you open the borders to allow people to import food, they're going to demand for foreign exchange. The demand for foreign exchange, you're going to see, without any commensurate improvement in the supply of foreign exchange, you're going to see Naira depreciate. If Naira depreciates, the pass-through effect of that depreciation will erode the removal of subsidy on, removal of duty on those food items. So we must, in as much as we're implementing this stopgap arrangement, we must go to the fundamental issue, which is insecurity in the country that led to farmers living in IDPs and therefore reduced food production. And because we have a reduction in food production, food prices have become very dear to Nigerians.
So in addressing these fundamental problems, you've talked about stability of Forex. What do you think we need to do within that 150-day period to give us some sort of security after the window is over?
Well, that's why we are talking about during the core issue. If you remember what I said earlier, that the food items that are causing this food scarcity and food inflation are locally made food. Tuber, water yam, potato. If you talk of cereals, you're talking of corn that are made, produced here. And the good thing about the food issues is that the time it takes between the planting and harvesting of these food items is less than 6 months. Corn is in the region of 3 months. Yam at most 4 to 6 months. Rice between 3 and 4 months. And so in any case, some of these food items can actually go through 2-cycle or 3-cycle farming season. But the farmers must be able to go to the farms. If the farmers go back to the farms and they are planting 3-season farming, then within 6 months, you are going to see food production that will displace or replace the food that are going to be imported in the next 6 months. Yeah. But if we don't address that, this stopgap arrangement, we have to roll it over repeatedly, and the impact will affect other aspects of the economy, the macroeconomic economic exchange rate.
All right, so but in the meantime, and that's talking about this duty-free import window, how would this directly impact our inflation figures despite being temporary? Would there be a decline?
I think in the first place, one is already expecting that inflation will begin to moderate. Not disinflation, not deflation, but disinflation. That means the rate at which inflation rate is increasing will begin to taper. Because we are gotten to a point where you call the base effect. We are now dealing with a base that's already high. Inflation rate is already high. So when you already have a high inflation, further increase, it's in terms of proportionate level, it's no longer at the same proportion as the previous increase. So we're going to deal with that. So in case we begin to see a moderation in inflation, it may not be solely attributed to the removal of duty, but ultimately one would expect that if all things being equal, like we say in economics, if exchange remains stable and we take out the duties on the food item, we should see a moderation in food prices, which will help cushion the cost of living crisis the current country is currently facing.
All right, so let's look into other initiatives. I mean, the organized private sector commended the federal government for this initiative, describing it as robust, comprehensive, and all-inclusive. But as the federal government says it will import 250,000 metric tons of wheat and 250,000 metric tons of maize. Federal government also says these semi-processed commodities will be supplied to small-scale processors and millers across the country. How does government go about this in making sure that the common man benefits from this?
You know, what I would ordinarily expect the government to do is, because we don't have commodities bought again, we don't have government stores today. So the government should bring in these products, make sure that they are distributed through a wide network of traders or marketers, probably using the 36 state governments to ensure that all the local governments have a distributor in those local governments. Anything short of that will lead to some level of rent seeking coming to it, because once you offer a product at a price that is below market, then it creates opportunity for those who are selling those products to build in a markup for themselves. So the government must be wary of a situation where economic rent will spring up from government importation of these items, and the ultimate beneficiary, the ultimate consumer, you and I, will not be able to get those goods or those items at the expected lower cost. It's a very difficult thing because you have scarcity, and any product, unless government is going to flood the market with excess supply, but as long as you still have scarcity, we're going to deal with possible arbitrage. The government must deploy, or the local government, same thing for local governments, to make sure that this is distributed evenly and equitably, and that a control or some level of oversight is provided to ensure that that is done. Anything short of that, you're going to see these food items that are being imported still being sold at exorbitant prices because the middlemen or the government officials had marked it up and built economic rent in the pricing.
All right, so do you advise that government inaugurates the National Commodity Board in real time?
Well, that's good. To set up that, of course, government is trying to even rationalize its agencies and ministries. Do you want to set up another agency for an ad hoc activity that you can use other channels, other existing channels of government to handle? If you want to set up the commodities board, now you have to start employing. You're going to give them temporary employment. You have to employ in all the states, and I don't think that's necessary. We can use the current local government. Let me tell you, governments at different tiers have been distributing palliatives through the local government chairmen, through the councillors. They can still deploy that channel. It's just that they must create some level of oversight, some level of checks and balances to ensure that those who are saddled with those responsibilities carry them out without abusing the privileges of their office.
But is this something we can do without?
Yes, I don't think the government should even consider the importation of food items as its line of business or what it should do. This is an aberration. This is a stopgap arrangement. This is one of the interventions that government take when the market forces fail. So it's not going to be a continuum. It's a one-off, and we should treat it as one-off. I did say that the focus should be on how do we improve food production, that farmers can actually produce 2-3 season farming. The rice we produce here, you can actually produce the paddy rice and the upland rice, which is a wet season or rainy season farming and the dry season farming for rice, which is 2 cycles. So if you do that, you're going to see productivity of the land cultivated doubling. And that's what we need to focus on. Government will best focus on providing irrigation facilities, providing other supporting legal framework that will allow for commercial agricultural activities.
All right, Mr. Johnson, the government is also looking at engagement with relevant stakeholders to get a GMP, and that is guaranteed minimum price. Talk to us about that. How crucial is that? And also, is that the same as price control?
Yes, absolutely. It's same another name for price control. If you talk of guaranteed maximum price, which is, I said, look, the problem we are going to have is that if you still have undersupply, if supply is still below demand, you cannot enforce guaranteed maximum price. Because what happens is there will be hoarding. When there's hoarding, the products that are imported by government will go into the black market and they will be sold at markup rates. Prices are even above the price they would have commanded in the open market. So government must be wary of that, which I said, look, the government must look for a channel, an relatively effective channel to make sure that these products are distributed to the needy. I think we have a poverty registrar today. If you have a poverty register, and then the government can use that channel to ensure that households, maybe they get a 25 kg of brown rice, 25 kg of maize for those who are at the rung of the ladder. But if you talk of guaranteed maximum price, it's difficult to enforce once the commodities that you are supplying to the market are not able to meet the demand for those commodities.
But are you saying, is this you saying that price control is not a good initiative? Because really there are those who have argued that this will not help us in any way, but will rather set us back.
It has never worked anywhere in the world. Like I said
so
earlier,
why do you think government should go ahead with it?
Well, I don't think the government should focus on price control or like what you call the maximum prices. The government should focus on what is the average consumption of these items, and then ensure that supply meets demand. Once supply meets demand, then prices will stabilize. And if supply is higher than demand, prices will crash. That is the natural law. When they're talking about population, I think our population is it 240 or 220 million? If you talk about a 220 million population, it's difficult to police in terms of price control. It won't work. What happens is that the guy who has the product has it in his store. He locks up the store and says that I have no product. And then in the night, he opens the store to those who are going to buy at exorbitant prices. You're going to pursue every merchant going to break their stores. If you recall, for those of us who were old enough to remember the 1983 era, when the government had a price control board and they were breaking stores, shops, looting shops, selling products from warehouses, and they call those things hoarded commodities. By the time they finished that, the products dried up and the prices jumped beyond what they were when the military government of General Muhammad Buhari was trying to enforce price control. It has never worked anywhere in the world. So I don't think the government should dissipate its energy trying to do that. We should, at best, bring in enough products to meet demand, enough of these commodities to meet demand in the short run, but ultimately focus on addressing the security situation in the country to improve food production. We can actually feed ourselves if we get...
But Mr. Johnson, if the federal government is now talking about purchasing surplus food commodities to restock the National Strategic Food Reserve, do you think we have enough of these reserves, or do you think we need more?
In the first place, I don't think we even have a lot of things in the reserves. The Strategic Food Reserve, we must recognize that they are basically built to mitigate food shortage at periods of unconventional events, like you have flooding, you have war, you have what you may call natural disaster or man-made disaster, such as war. It is not a source for supply of food to the communities anywhere in the world. It's not about, if there's a outbreak of war today, Nigeria not starve to death. So you can open the Strategic Food Reserve to feed the communities for a short period of time. It's like what we talk of manna. It's not there forever. It's not a source of supply of food to any community. So we should have enough in the strategic food reserve to address short-term, temporary shortfall in food supply or dislocation in the supply chain that could lead to people starving, but it's never a source of consistent food for any country, any community.
All right, then. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue this conversation. Please stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're discussing the federal government's 180-day plan to unveil the strategy to slash food prices. And I've been speaking with Johnson Chukwu, an economist and the CEO, Kyari Asset Management Limited. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us, for staying with us on the program. So before we went on that break, we were talking about government's intervention to purchase surplus food commodities to restock the National Strategic Food Reserve. And the second part of my question was, do you think we need to construct more reserves?
Yes, Jumoke, I think we need to have more reserves. I did mention earlier that reserves strategic food reserves are built to provide relief for communities or societies where there is this dislocation in food supplies or created by either man-made disaster or natural disaster. As we speak today, I don't think we have enough of those silos. If you go to some states, and maybe there's only one silo, and you're talking about a state with a population of 3, 4, 5 million people. Some states, as big Lagos has more than 80 million people living here. So you should have in every major conurbation, you should have a strategic food reserve or a silo that, if the need arises, can be opened to ensure that people are fed and people don't starve because of those issues. And I think it's something we need to do. But in terms of buying surplus food items, now I don't even think we have surplus food items, but let's even build the silos. And during peak harvest seasons, when a lot of the harvests are wasted at the farm gates, the government can now deploy off-takers or buyers to buy at the farm gates and take to the silos and have them preserved in case at the future.
Right. I asked the question because I understand that Nigeria has a combined total storage capacity of 1.3 million MT when fully utilized, and 51 warehouses with a combined capacity of 108,000 MT. And only 6 out of the 16 reserves that are retained by the federal government after concession were operational as of last year. But with the complexities of the situation on our hands at the moment, how do you advise government on the management of the country's NSFR delivery system? Because constructing more is a different conversation, but management of the ones we have.
I think the government, the Minister of Agriculture, should manage the silos. If not the Minister of Agriculture, then the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs should manage it. So we should have maybe a unit in either of these ministries, whichever one is most appropriate in terms of competence on managing it. We should have a unit that's in charge of that. Like I said, the issues around silos, because you never can imagine when you're going to have those crises. It's not when you have those crises we're starving to death. Every country will have strategic food reserve. They will have strategic fuel reserve, just in case of, like I said, either man-made or natural disaster. So your citizens can actually be protected for some period of time. But like we said, we don't have enough of those silos, but I don't think it's something that the government can concession. Because if you concession them to private sector individuals, because there is no flow from the silos to the market, in terms of income for those concessionaires, they will find it difficult to meet their cost of maintaining those silos. And that's why nothing is happening in those silos. It should be part of the social services that the government must provide, just like it's providing police services, providing security services. We'll also provide what we may call food security services. It is the priority of government to protect that.
But do you agree with those who have said one of the noticeable weaknesses in the management of the strategic food reserve in the country is absence of any legal instrument to back up its operation as an autonomous government agency?
Yeah, that's why I said there are issues about legalities or enabling law, but it doesn't stop operational issues. We are dealing with operational issues. And we need to address the operational issues and then build laws that will ensure that those operational structures are now backed by legislation. Take, for instance, the issue of the strategic food reserve. Where are they located? What will be the basis of locating each of them? Like I said, if you have major cities that have up to 500,000 people living in those cities, they should have a strategic food reserve located within their vicinity. Then who should be in charge of that? That's where you're talking about regulation and law. And I did say that we have to look at, is it Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs? Because it will come into use as a matter of humanitarian issues when the government needs to reach out to the most vulnerable in the society, when there is civil commotion, or when there is war, or when there is a natural disaster like flooding, fire, and other what have you. So in terms of enabling law, I don't think the problem is actually the enabling law. It is necessary to have a regulation around it or an enactment that will provide for consistency. But even operational issues are what we need to address. How do we locate them? What will be the basis of locating them? How do we restock the strategic food reserve? What are the conditions under which the strategic food reserve will have to be open and allowed to discharge or distribute food to those communities? These have to be defined in terms of operational use.
So do you think the management of the strategic food reserve should be taken out of the Ministry of Agriculture?
I did say earlier that the ministry that, since we now have a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, it's actually that ministry that will have need for strategic food reserve. It is the ministry that will need to call on that strategic food reserve to feed the very hungry and the most vulnerable, those who are internally displaced. The Ministry of Agriculture will, at best, in effect, the Ministry of Agriculture does not have any farm, so they don't even have to say, okay, they are stocking the strategic food reserve from their farms. They are still going to buy from private farmers, which I think the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs should better handle. I think it should move from Ministry of Agriculture. That's the Ministry of Agriculture should focus on providing supporting infrastructure that will enable productive agricultural production that an improvement in yield in terms of providing better yield seedlings, in terms of providing irrigation, in terms of supporting farmers, and in terms of implements, particularly stuff like fertilizer, making sure that they have the appropriate fertilizer, providing them knowledge or probably through a station workers that will provide them some level of training and hold them to adopt modern agricultural mechanisms.
All right, so the government is also talking about using existing government initiatives to ramp up production for the 2024-2025 farming cycle, with continued support to smallholder farmers during the ongoing wet season farming. Do you think these existing initiatives have been working, or there must be some adjustments?
Jumoke, I'm sorry to say, or I regret to say, I don't know which is the right word to use, that it's not working. Jumoke, the quarter of this year, Q1 2024, agricultural GDP growth was 0.18%. 0.18%, which means agriculture remained flat in the first quarter of this year. So, and that was in spite of so many years of anchor borrower program, commercial credit agricultural schemes, and several intervention funding arrangements that were put in place by the Central Bank and the Ministry of Agriculture to support agricultural activities. Why was it so? Because the farmers are not in the farms. People in states like Katsina and Zamfara have to pay bandits to be able to go to the farm. And see, they are being abused, kidnapped, killed, and many of them have moved to IDP camps. If you go to the North Central, so many people are living in the IDP camps. If we don't address the issue of insecurity, this initiative by government, no matter how salutary they are, cannot be effective because they have to be channeled through these farmers, and the farmers are not going to the farm.
But also, you know, when it comes to strengthening and accelerating dry season farming nationwide, this looks like an issue for some stakeholders who continue to say, despite abundant water resources, seasonal farming is still common. I mean, what can government do to ensure all year-round farming, apart from the matter of insecurity?
Well, I think the core thing they need to do is they need to do irrigation. Look at River Niger and River Benue. The two rivers almost run across the country. So if the dredging of the River Niger and River Benue had taken place and those major rivers serve as irrigation base, irrigation to support farming across the states that are bordering those two rivers, we will be talking of two-season farming. Virtually every state in the country has a major river. Be it in the north, be it in the south of the country, they have major rivers that many states are actually named after the rivers that crisscross those states. There's no reason why the government over these years should not have invested in proper irrigation, major arterial irrigation, secondary irrigation, and ensure that we have two-season farming or all year-round farming. But unfortunately, if you don't have the irrigation network, it's difficult for farmers to have dry season farming.
But really, now that federal government is looking for solutions, do you see a quick fix to some of these issues if state governors collaborate with federal governments to identify irrigable lands and increase land under cultivation in their various states, just as government is asking for?
Well, it wouldn't be a quick fix, but there are things that can be done to improve the yield on the cultivated land, even the one that is currently cultivated. I talk of improved seedling. I talk of improved planting methods. Take, for instance, in rice farming today, in the southern part of the country, the same rice farm where they do the nurseries also, they no longer have to go and do a nursery bed and then transplant. The same farm, the wet farmland is where they do both the nursery and the growing of those rice leaves. So we are now having line irrigation that people are producing tomato here. They are producing pepper. People are using line irrigation to produce maize. So we just need to transfer knowledge. I think that's a starting point, and that will improve the yield on the cultivated land in the short term. But ultimately, we need to expand the cultivated area, and we need to have multiple season farming.
But do you see state governors committing to this?
I think they should, because I've talked of the cost of living crisis. It's not just the federal government we should hold accountable for the cost of living crisis we are facing today. The state governments also have to be responsible to ensure that they, at the minimum, mitigate a looming social crisis in their states. If it starts, it's going to happen in all the states or virtually all the states. It's not going to be only on the federal government. So everybody should put hands on deck to ensure that we mitigate a looming food crisis in the country. And that applies to state governments, local governments. Every state government must ensure that some level of farming is taking place. There's no state that you don't have some farmers that can be encouraged to produce more. So it's not just at the table of the federal government. Everybody should be involved, including you and I. And I've been advocating that even those of us who have white-collar jobs, if you can rent a piece of land that is not built, you can actually do some level of farming in that place. You can plant maize, you can plant tomato, you can plant a lot of things that are currently in short supply today, and that will not just help the country's food security, will also help your family in ensuring that you have balanced diet and live above the poverty line.
So I think federal government is also saying the same thing with talks about developing strategic engagement for youth and women for immediate greenhouse cultivation of crops. But, I want us to also talk about generation change in agriculture, because today the replacement of the aging agricultural population is a global challenge in many food-producing countries. And it's a fact that today young people are less motivated to engage in family farming. But how can governments make agriculture attractive to young people?
Look, interestingly, I'm in Lagos, we are witnessing a lot of young people actually interested in farming. You see, what is dying off, what is aging, is the whole and mature farmers who are getting older and they no longer have the energy to carry the hoe, to till the ground, and the mature to cut the forest. We should be talking about mechanized agriculture. A lot of young people. My son left his job and went into farming. He has a poultry farm. In fact, the last Friday I visited his poultry farm. He's also planting tomato. He's planting maize. He's planting pepper in that his farm. And I was quite impressed with what he's doing. And I have a friend who left a job in Shell and is also into farming. So a lot of young people are going into farming, but they're not going to be carrying the hoe on their shoulder and the machete on their right hand. They are going into mechanized farming. They are going to modern agriculture, adopting modern agricultural techniques to do their farming. And that's what the government needs to encourage. But certainly, we cannot, as a country, continue to rely on the aging population whose skills we are only limited to using, making more holes and cutting bushes with their machetes. These things are now done mechanically.
Absolutely. And also because, I mean, Nigeria is the highest rice producer in Africa, but was suffering greatly from smugglers who, after enjoying government credits to cultivate this product, decided to take the rice to neighboring countries. How do we as a nation curb smuggling?
Well, the agency of government, the agency in charge of stopping smuggling or curbing smuggling is a federal government agency. And I think with technology, we can reasonably reduce the level of smuggling in the country. But what I would actually look at it from a different perspective. Since, like you said, if that is correct, that we're the largest rice producer in Africa, what we should do is continue to encourage rice farming so that we begin to export through the right channel excess rice that is produced locally. And then we will earn foreign exchange from that export. And then that will even help us stabilize the exchange rate, improve on reduce inflation, and improve our standard of living. So it's not something we should fight. Rather, what we should fight is to increase further the food rice production in the country. I had talked about two-season rice farming. That's what the government should do. If we are producing this, let government ensure that those industrial rice farmers are supported with irrigation and let them produce more. And then strengthen the customs so that they will prevent illegal export of products, and any product that is being exported, including rice, goes through the right channel, letter of credit is open, inflow is recognized, the farmer gets his foreign exchange, sells in the market, becomes a rich man, and then that will encourage other farmers to also adopt the same techniques and go into rice farming, and then we'll become like China or Thailand, that's a major among the major exporters of rice in the world.
Indeed. So let's quickly talk about the inauguration of the National Livestock Transformation Implementation Committee, which was inaugurated on Tuesday to develop and implement policies prioritizing livestock development in alignment with the National Livestock Transformation Plan. And also a Ministry of Livestock Development has been created. This has continued to draw applause and condemnation from Nigerians. For you, is this a good move?
Well, on paper, it's a good move. Then they tell you that the devil is in detail, but in Nigeria, the devil is in implementation. Because a lot of times we have wonderful concepts and then implementation becomes the challenge. But I think the emphasis when it comes to livestock farming or livestock security would be to ensure that we have those places where the livestock are nurtured instead of situation where we have herders who are roaming around the country. Because if you keep the livestock in proper farms like you have in other parts of the world, you are going to even have an improvement in the yield, in the protein yield of these livestock, unlike what we have today, where the livestock are living at the mercy of walking long distances and feeding, not properly feeding. And then when you take, for instance, the cattle, and when you slaughter them, you find out the meat you have there is very weak, very poor. So in terms of productivity of the livestock in the countries, we are one of the lowest in the world because of the way we rear our livestock. We should change that approach, and I think that should be the focus of this body that the federal government has just inaugurated.
Mr. Johnson, experts have said the success of these measures outlined by the federal government hinges on the cooperation and collaboration of all relevant MDAs and stakeholders. So how does federal government achieve total commitment in this regard?
Well, we talk of the MDAs. MDAs are all federal government ministries and departments. So there is a coordinating minister of the economy. The coordinating minister of the economy will ensure that all the heads of these agencies, departments, and are brought to have a buy-in into these policies. And then ensure that not only that the farmers also have a buy-in into these policies. Because if you don't have the buy-in of the farmers and they still take their cattle and enter the bush to feed them in the bush, you're not going to achieve anything. So they must work with government. The government must provide the land for these farms to be set up. And then you must also have the Ministry of Transport that will support transportation of, probably the Ministry of, through the rail system, transportation of cattle through the rail system to reduce the cost of transporting them from one part of the country to the other. And some of these things can be properly coordinated, and it's not rocket science. Jumoke, if you go to any other part of the world, you won't see cattle roaming around the streets. You will go to farm and you'll see the level of harvest from these cattle, including milk production, apart from meat production.
I get that. But before I let you go, we have about a minute to wrap up. Let's talk about the economic team, because it's not the first time the federal government is setting up an economic team of crack economists. What's different about this current team?
I don't know if there's anything different from this current team. The members of this team have been members of the economic management team right from Obasanjo. Many of them have been members of previous economic management teams. I think that what will make the difference is the leadership, the quality of leadership that is provided by the government. The leadership defines everything. I think there's a saying that it's not that you are rather afraid of a pack of sheep that's led by a lion than a pack of lions led by a sheep. The president must provide leadership. It's these are advisory teams. They are not implementation teams. It's the state government that would have to implement whatever recommendation they make. The advice recommended to the president will have to make a choice on which option that he accepts, and must ensure that he has a minister who has the capacity to implement ferociously. That's what matters. Right. But in terms of the composition, the same group of people have been recycled multiple times by previous governments.
All right then, Johnson Chukwu, economist, CEO, Kyari Asset Management Limited. Thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you for your insight on this latest development by the federal government. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for watching, everyone. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. Get in touch with us on our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and X. That's TVC News NG. You can use the hashtag Politics Tonight. It was also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Good night, everyone.